Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
There are moments that just feel surreal. Moments where you have to blink a few times because you just can't quite believe your own eyes. Moments where you look back and wonder if what you saw or what you experienced was really real. It is these moments that an appreciation for life can be found, but it is found holding hands with horror, deception, and death as it tries to pull a body under. While the only things guaranteed about life is that we die, there is a broader truth to life as well. For maybe it is true, we all will die, but we will all also experience life. We will experience life at its most amazing, when the sun shines upon your face and peace washes over you. We will all experience life when it is boring, automatic, and when you begin to wonder where your spark went. And we will all undoubtedly handle life at its most raw, where pain sinks in its claws, where you become crippled from fear and you wonder if this is it. Just like death, life is guaranteed. It is how we choose to look at that life that makes us different. It is what makes some pessimist. It is what makes some optimist. But there is another guarantee. When pain sinks in its claws and pulls you towards the grave, it is the optimists who find a way out alive. Just like Gina. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello and welcome back. I am your host, Kayla. For anyone who is listening to Tragedy with a View and you've not listened before, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoy and I hope you stick around. And if you've listened for a little while, please, I am begging you, take a moment to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews are truly the easiest way to allow this podcast to grow and therefore allow me to continue creating and making new content for you. And I would just truly appreciate if you took a moment to do that. For those of you who do, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. For those of you who don't, you're probably going to hear me say this again. So also let it be known that this episode that I'm doing today is not the episode that I had planned for the week. The episode that I had planned requires a ton of just kind of piecing parts of the puzzle together, and that requires a lot of time. And unfortunately, with the cold snap that we've had this week and the snow that we've had, actually it wasn't even with this storm that came in, but the pipes on our house froze and we're okay. There's nothing wrong. They just froze. It took a couple days to get them thawed out, and we have plans moving forward now. But as of me starting out this last week, intending to do a completely different story, I kind of had to scrap that one for now. And this one was just kind of in the background. And, I was able to find a couple of interviews with Gina, who's the main person in the story. And so thanks to those interviews, everything was kind of like chronologically already listed out. And I just had to do some, basic Googling to understand language and location and what certain things were. So luckily this was a little bit easier of an episode, at least putting it together wise. And so instead of the animal attack story that I was going to be bringing you this week, you're getting something different. And while the drafting of it was easier, the story itself is pretty difficult to listen to, especially once we get into kind of the details of what she experienced. And so we're gonna go with that. So as has been covered in some other of my prior episodes, when rescues get sketchy, it is frequently somehow someone on the Coast Guard who was helping to pull off this rescue. Those in the Coast Guard are trained specifically with daring rescues in mind. The Coast Guard is tasked with protecting the U.S. waterways, ports, and shorelines by not only enforcing the laws as they witness them being broken, but also, and maybe more importantly, acting as a first responder on the water. And what do you know? This sense of acting on right and wrong, of stepping up when the tide starts to suck people in, was exactly what Gina Panuzzi was looking for in a career. Gina was born in California, but then her family moved to Carson City, Nevada. When she joined the Coast Guard in 2004, she had no idea what life was going to have in store for her. Gina attended boot camp. She participated in the airman program where she was trained on helicopter flight protocol, how to maintain the craft and its instruments, and different support roles while in flight or while the craft was also on the ground. She then went through an Avonic electronic technician program, which focuses on how to use, maintain, troubleshoot, and repair electronic systems in the helicopter, which often includes electronic systems that are used in navigation, communication, and flight control systems. As you might expect, she graduated from these programs without an issue. By 2010, she was approaching her 6-year mark in the Coast Guard, and something would happen that drastically altered the course of Gina's life. At this point in her career, she was a petty officer, second class, and while I just got done telling you that the Coast Guard works on the water, this story actually happens on dry land, and that is exactly the problem. The first major task that Gina was a part of in 2010 was a security ops mission for the 2010 Winter Olympics, which was being held in Vancouver, Canada. The Olympics, whether it is winter or summer, is a huge international multi-sport event. In the 2010 event, the events were spread out from February 12th through February 28th, featuring 86 events and approximately 2,600 athletes from 82 nations. The Winter Olympics holds competitive events for hockey, cross country, skiing, downhill skiing, figure skating, bobsled, curling, luge, snowboarding, speed skating, and many, many others. Of course, with all of these high-level athletes from all over the world coming together to compete, it draws a ton of attention. It pulls in a lot of high-profile people, and of course, that means the security at the events has to be top-notch. Gina and some of the others on her team, and specifically this flight that we are going to be talking about, included Commander Patrick Shaw, Lieutenant Commander Steve Cerveny, Petty Officer 3rd Class Darren Hicks, who was the rescue swimmer, and Petty Officer 3rd Class Edward Citra, the flight mechanic. And during the Olympics, they were all stationed out of Whidbey Island in Washington, and they were there for 5 weeks, including the time before the Olympics began and the days that the Olympics were running. Their helicopter was an H-60, which is a medium-sized helicopter, which are often referred to as Jayhawks, and they are comparable to Blackhawks. I've seen a couple people mention that it was like essentially the same craft with a different paint job, and I don't know how fully accurate that is or not, but what I can tell you is that Jayhawks are not really used for tactical work, so the paint is different. In the Blackhawks, the paint is a matte black or a dark gray, and the Jayhawks are painted either orange or yellow. And the helicopter that they were flying specifically during the Olympics was equipped with a bulletproof panel on the bottom of the helicopter so that if anyone shot at them once they were in the air, they would be significantly more protected. They were part of the MSRT team, which stands for Maritime Safety and Response Team. And the short explanation is that because of this high-profile event, they also had high-profile people attending, such as the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States were going to be coming to the Olympics. They needed to be there in the event that something happens, such as someone shows up and sets off a bomb. If there was some sort of gas-related event, whether it be like an accidental gas leak or a purposeful one, if somebody came in trying to attack people, their responsibility was to have escape routes planned so that way somebody could go in, get to these high profile people, bring them out to a helicopter, and then leave the premises with them via the air. And of course, these plans all also have contingency plans, and there's just a ton of plans in place in case of a mass emergency that required getting, again, these high profile people out of the area as fast as possible. As we already know, the Olympics in 2010 went off without a hitch. It is upon its completion that they were released to go back home to their base in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. As some of you might imagine, flights don't always take a straight shot from point A to point B, especially when you're crossing not only one but two massive mountain systems in your way. So Gina and her team opted to fly south to Salt Lake City, Utah, stay the night there, refuel before they would fly to Kansas City, where they would again take a stop to refuel before heading to Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia is very close to Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and so that's why they were flying in there. So the first leg of their trip was to go to Salt Lake City in Utah, and they stay the night there. But the next morning, they notice that things are just off. Salt Lake City is notorious for having weird and sudden weather events that seem to arrive and disappear quickly. So when the crew heard that some flights were being canceled from the airport, they just kind of took their time, knowing that things could change quickly. They were not alone in this either, as there was a whole second crew and second helicopter that was kind of doing the same work with them. And so they were flying essentially the same route, and they were actually flying in formation. After a good amount of time of waiting there at the airport, the pilots left to go meet with the team of people who are aware of the weather and what sort of things they're looking at that could affect their flight. They were, checking in with the airport staff to get an update on the potential of them being able to fly out that day. When they returned, they told their crews something along the lines of, the weather is here and it's not going anywhere. Thanks to us being in helicopters, though, we can fly under the weather, get around it, and then be on our way. And to be clear, these pilots are extremely skilled pilots. They have flown in mountainous terrains. They've taken multiple mountainous flying courses. They have flown in tactical situations. They've flown through storms. And the crew felt confident in their plan, that they were going to trust their pilots. So everyone climbs on board, buckles in, and gets ready for a flight home. But after about 45 minutes, it was clear this flight was going to be an annoying one, to say the least. For starters, the pilot's door latch kept releasing, which could cause the door to open. And by this point, they are over the Uinta mountain range. This mountain range is a major range that connects to the Rockies, and it runs east to west in northeastern Utah and then runs into southwestern Wyoming. The tallest peak in this range is Kings Peak, which stands 13,527 feet tall, and this area is very popular for backcountry hiking, camping, and fishing. The area encompasses over 1,700 miles of trails, over 1,000 lakes, and 400 miles of streams and waterways. Mountains can cause a variety of flight-related difficulties just due to the widely varying terrain and elevation changes. So with the storm that had come in, visibility was next to nothing. So the crew was relying on their instruments to navigate their way through the mountain range. And as this door continues to pop open, they're not able to see where they're going, like with their own eyes. They are then alerted that there's a plane flying in the area, but it's not showing up on their radar. And so they decide to come to a stop. They are hovering in midair. So they basically decide that they're going to stop. They're going to allow this plane that they can't get a location on to have the right of way. And while they are trying to make radio contact with this plane, they also decide to work on the pilot's door. Again, the pilot's door is more annoying than anything else. The latch won't keep the door shut, which I guess from what I've gathered from listening to these interviews, it's more of like dang it, like my door is opening up again, rather than like oh no, I need to be worried about this, my door is opening up again. So they decide to work on this thing while they're trying to figure out where the plane is, make sure that it's clear and out of their way. And it is the co-pilot specifically who is trying to contact the pilot on the plane. And there's just kind of a lot of things happening at one time. And the second aircraft that was actually with them was kind of like coming to a stall too, but they then decided that they were okay to fly on. As you can imagine, even though Gina is sitting in the back of the helicopter, she is kind of away from the ruckus that is going on up front. But the vibration that helicopters have just from the blades spinning around and keeping the craft in the air, this vibration is still extremely taxing on a person's nervous system. Not only is she vibrating, but so is all of their luggage, all of their ammunition cans, their cargo, their .50 caliber gun. And Gina is tall. She's 6'1", and she's kind of like, while all this stuff is happening up there and I can't really do anything, the best thing that I can do is just stay out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and stretch out my legs. So she props her feet up on the cargo. She straightens out her knees, and it's only 10 a.m. So she's thinking about how they still have 8 hours of flight time ahead of them when an alarm goes off. It is the altitude alarm, and the pilot and co-pilot and Darren, who's the rescue swimmer who was handling the communications board, they all start to take action. They're acknowledging that this alarm is going off. And again, because Gina's role doesn't require her to do anything, and sometimes the best thing that you can do is just stay out of other people's way, she just sits in her seat and waits. The altitude alarm doesn't necessarily mean that you're like falling out of the sky. For helicopters, the altitude is based on making sure that you are moving at a speed that allows the helicopter to use the air to lift it up and keep it in the air. And this allows them to fly and go in the direction that they want. So again, remember, they came to a hover, so they're stopped pretty much, which could have meant that the blades just weren't moving fast enough to keep them in the air due to a lack of that forward movement. And so this alarm going off in and of itself is not alarming. You have to take into consideration the other things that are happening around you. And so the pilot and the co-pilot, they turn off the alarm, and then about a minute later, it goes off again. They turn it off a second time, and within another minute, goes off a third time. When it is turned off this third time, there was almost this moment of silence, of stillness, a moment where the entire world seems to just pause. And then absolute chaos erupts. As the helicopter collides with the mountain, it tips to the side and the blades are snapped off. There is almost a moment where the helicopter free falls before it again violently slams into the solid rock. The helicopter then begins to bounce and roll and tumble down the side of the cliff. And inside the helicopter, Gina and the crew are completely at the mercy of this crash. The helicopter is spinning out of control, and there's nothing that they can do. They are skidding, crumpling, and destroying this helicopter as it tumbles down 1,000 feet from the point of impact to the bottom of a ravine. As much as the helicopter was being tossed around by the forest and the mountains, the crew inside was being tossed around as well. The tail of the helicopter breaks off, pine trees stab through the siding of the helicopter. Gina is grabbing a hold of the sides of her seat to brace herself as she tries to pull her legs from off of the cargo, and then everything goes black. As far as any helicopter crash goes, crashes don't typically result in survivors, especially with Blackhawks and Jayhawks. And I tried to look up, but I really just couldn't find the exact fatality or survival rate of military helicopters. But when I Googled, Blackhawk fatalities, there's just article after article stating, like within the first line or within the caption, no survivors, no survivors, no survivors, no survivors, which could just be the algorithm giving me what I'm looking for, which is tragic stories. But I think it's also telling that there are very few situations where people are surviving. When Gina comes back to, she can hear the pilot and the co-pilot talking. She can see that they're all like laying on their side, And she was actually seated with the back of her seat against the side of the plane that's against the ground. So she's laying on her back, and Darren and Edward's seats, the bolts that had bolted their seats to the helicopter had broken off. And so they, along with all of their cargo, their luggage, all of their stuff was on top of Gina. And as the co-pilot is trying to check in with everyone, Gina is just shocked to see trees and snow inside the helicopter. She's having this moment of what the heck just happened? She's recognizing we crashed, but also what just happened? And I'm going to put a photo of this crash on social media along with Patreon for you to go take a look at. And I'm telling you, it is a miracle that everyone survived. By this point, Edward is kind of getting himself up, and Gina is really struggling to breathe. She says out loud that she's worried that she punctured a lung because of how difficult it is for her to get breath in. But there's an overriding sensation with the amount of pain coming from her left knee. She now is starting to realize that the pilot is repeating, "I can't believe this happened." And it was clearly that he was in shock. And something someone realizes is that the fuel is leaking all over, and they need to get out of the helicopter because their battery is still connected. And so if the fuel gets to that battery and a spark ignites, the whole thing's going to go up in flames. So they're on the side of this mountain. It's during a winter storm. It is a very rugged part of the Uinta Mountains. And Darren and Edward were incredibly unharmed. And they also are the two with the most medical experience out of all of those on this craft. So the co-pilot had a compound fracture to one of his legs, and the dash of the helicopter had actually caved in kind of on him and around him, but otherwise he was fine. He didn't have any other significant injuries.
Are you drawn to the dark? Do you find yourself enticed in the forbidden and ominous? Join me, Steph, as I explore all things menacing and malevolent in my podcast, Sinister Story Hour. I discuss true stories of cults and crimes with the occasional urban legend. I also dedicate episodes to missing persons in the United States. And you could be the missing link to provide information and clues that will help to bring them home. Join me every week for a new story. Come on in, sit down, and get ready, because it's story time.
The pilot was kind of on the verge of severe shock this entire time, but he's able to kind of bring himself down a little bit, and he's able to climb out of the helicopter himself at that point. And finally, once they come to Gina to help get her out of the helicopter, they realize that she is kind of in the worst shape out of all of them. She had broken her left kneecap in half and tore every ligament and tendon in her knee, and then also shattered her right ankle. Her ankle was actually so bad that it was pointing in the wrong direction. And to add more issues to this list, they find that something had torn a hole in her hip, and she's bleeding quite a bit. And during the process of them getting Gina out of the helicopter, because she's finding that her left knee is just collapsing. She can't put any weight on that leg. She also can't put any weight on her right leg because her ankle is broken in half. And so they're helping her get out, and she's noticing that her stomach feels weird, but she's kind of just assuming that this is broken ribs and that they've punctured a lung. And Darren and Edward, they help get her out of the helicopter again because of all the leaking fuel, and the battery is still connected. And so they get Gina out, and when they let her go, she ends up sliding on the snow into this fresh pile of snow. And as she's finding that her adrenaline is coming down, she's beginning to feel more and more. She knows that she is bleeding. She knows that her left knee hurts. She knows that her hip hurts. Reaching her arms up hurts. And she's like clearly the worst shape out of all of them. Someone is able to grab and inflate the rescue raft to put her on or inside of, so that way they can just drag her. And they end up using a robe that one of the guys had taken from the hotel that they were staying in to put on the outside of her hip to try to help manage the bleeding. In the meantime, the pilot, who is again kind of rolling back and forth out of this shock phase, is kind of circling the helicopter and just kind of like muttering things. And all of this is happening while the co-pilot is still stuck inside under the dash. And as all of this stuff is happening, only about 10 minutes have passed. It's right about that time that they realize that there is no way to get the co-pilot out of the helicopter without additional help or tools. And so, again, this is 2010. They all had cell phones on them. And of the 5, the only one who had service was Verizon. And I know people shit on Verizon quite often because honestly, I think the prices are high is what I'm hearing a lot of. And then like I hear that the customer service isn't so great, which fine. But also out of the places that I've visited, Verizon tends to be the one with service. So I'm not going to complain about them too much. And so the one person who had service, and I'm not sure if they called or if they text or how he communicated with Elizabeth City base that they had crashed, and the other helicopter, as far as they knew, had no idea. The other helicopter that had been flying with them, they started flying in formation, and then when they stopped due to the door issues in the other plane, when it was safe for them to continue going forward, the second plane, they just kind of said, okay, we'll catch up with you later. Go ahead. Thanks to the emergency locator beacon, though, they already know that something is going on, and they are able to get the coordinates from this beacon. From there, the local sheriff department is contacted, who contacts a search and rescue team who set out on snowmobiles to search for the downed helicopter and its crew. But the crew doesn't know this. Gina doesn't know this. All Gina knows is that she is lying there and her injuries are screaming at her. She finds herself getting very warm and very hot. She starts sweating and she's in like all of these layers, and she's laying in the elements of this winter storm. And Gina doesn't know it, but the crew member who was sitting with her at the time does. Gina is going into shock and she is becoming hypothermic on top of all of her other injuries that are now like starting to come to light because her adrenaline is starting to wear off. And so everything is starting to just like creep up and scream at her. So she is finding that she has a broken nose. She has probably a broken jaw. She can tell that something again is going on with her abdomen, but she can't really tell what. She is bleeding from her hip still, and it has roughly been a half hour now. And Gina starts to feel a bit panicked because of everything that is going on and everything. She is kind of listing out what's wrong with her in her own head. And on top of it, she's also kind of recognizing that she has hypothermia and that when it gets bad enough, you want to strip out of your clothes. But she's still telling people like, I'm sweating. I feel like I'm on fire. Take some of my layers off because I'm too hot. And I can't do it myself. Like, I'm hurting too much. I can't physically do it myself. But luckily, no one is listening to her. Actually, people are putting layers on her to try to keep her warm. Meanwhile, search and rescue is trying to figure out all of their options. So they get a hold of the Uinta-Wasatch-Cache National Forest and spoke to a park ranger who also sent out a team of search and rescue personnel, one of which was a cardiovascular surgeon and was actually the father-in-law of one of the men that Gina was stationed with back in Elizabeth City. So, small world. The care flight from the hospital was unable to launch a helicopter due to this winter storm that had rolled in. And so search and rescue ended up reaching out and getting in touch with the second helicopter that had been flying through with Gina and her crew. And if you'll remember, they were also carrying a ton of gear a ton of personal belongings and cargo and just all of this stuff. So at this point, they're alerted that Gina specifically is in really bad shape and that the co-pilot has some injuries and the pilot is in shock and behaving oddly. And so as they swing around and re-enter the mountain range again, they are keenly aware that they are going to have to make some room for these 3 injured parties. They happen to fly over a section of land where they notice it's fenced in, and they decide this is as good a spot as any to dump all the stuff that we don't need. So they fly over and hover over that fenced in part, and they just shove everything out that they don't need for the rescue into this person's yard. I'm talking luggage, ammo, the 50 cal, all of it goes out the door and lands in this random person's yard. And because it's probably going to be wondered, the landowner found the luggage and was able to see that it had like the names and the location of the people and where they were stationed. And so he called them and was like, what the heck is going on? Like, I just found all this stuff in my yard. And they explained, there's a rescue in process. They needed to clear out the helicopter to fit more people on board. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to just move it into the garage and, cover it up, and it'll be here when you're ready to come get it. I don't know if it was ever retrieved or not, but they were working with each other there. Back in the ravine, Gina is still declining. She is feeling warm and like she could drift off to sleep. She's feeling very comfortable at this point, but she's also aware that this isn't a good thing, that she needs to stay awake. And so in order to kind of kick her adrenaline back up again, she punches herself in the hip, the injured hip, the hip that is bleeding. Someone notices that she's turning like a little bit bluish gray, and it's indicating that she's not getting enough oxygen in, right? At the same time, they are finally able to get the co-pilot out of the helicopter, and they're able to splint his leg. Darren then changes gear and he starts preparing Gina to get out of there. And as like all of this, again, it's all happening simultaneously. So the snowmobilers at this point arrive. So they are aware that this other helicopter is coming back for them. And Darren is insistent that Gina needs to get help right away. Like, she is top priority. This is urgent. They can't wait. One of the snowmobilers decides that if they're able to get her on the back of his snowmobile, he will be able to drive her out of the ravine and up to meet the helicopter that is coming to meet them. The best option that they could come up with, which was a very, very short amount of time, like they needed to act now. The idea was to put her tummy down over the back of the snowmobile, so that way she was like draped over the back of it. And she quoted in one of the interviews that she was draped over the back like a sack of potatoes. So they are taking Gina to a peak where the helicopter can land, and her legs are dangling off the side of the snowmobile. Her, again, badly injured legs, and every time they catch on a brush or a tree or even the snow, shooting pain just flies through her. Finally, though, they make it. They get to the helicopter, and as soon as they get her on the helicopter and they take off, they're getting ready to call the hospital so that way they can alert the hospital that, hey, you've got a trauma coming. And when they get into the air, they can actually see the hospital. And it's so close that they don't even bother to call. Turns out this hospital is one of the best trauma centers on the West Coast. So Gina is extremely lucky. Once at the hospital, the team there finds that in addition to Gina's broken nose, broken jaw, broken ankle, broken knee, broken hip, and significant blood loss, she has also broken an eye socket, knocked out or cracked 6 teeth. She broke her neck in 2 places, broke her back, and somehow her stomach had been torn open and her intestines had been pulled from her body and were very badly damaged. So her small intestine had actually separated from her colon, and the fact that they kept her flight vest on compressed her enough that as her body swelled, she didn't bleed out. But all of these toxins that your body eliminates through your digestive tract are now just free inside of her abdominal cavity. By the time that they get her on the surgical table, she has lost so much blood that she was pronounced dead, but they didn't give up on her. In that surgery, she lost 6 feet of her small intestine, which, by the way, welcome to your elementary school science class. Let me remind you that the small intestine is 20 to 22 feet long. So she lost half of her colon and her spleen, along with 6 feet of her small intestine. By the time the surgery was done, they had her on a constant blood transfusion, essentially pushing so much blood into her body, trying to find like all of the places that she was bleeding from so that way they could kind of patch her up. And also like trying to combat the sheer amount of blood loss that she was suffering. They called up her family, and the way that they described it to them was that they were doing everything they could to basically just keep her alive long enough that they were able to come say goodbye. The surgeon even stated that this was the most traumatic case that he had ever seen. Out of surgery, Gina was put on life support, and her abdomen had swollen up so badly that they weren't able to close her up. And so they kind of just put this sterile wrap over her stomach and then covered her with blankets so that way nobody could see what was going on there. Gina, though, persists. Over the next 7 days, she had more than a dozen surgeries, but then after 7 days, Gina woke up. In actuality, in order for doctors to bring her out of the coma, they wanted her to be stable for 2 days, which happened way faster than they anticipated. So when she woke up on day 7, she was in a room filled with all of her family members. And as a mom, I can't imagine the absolute relief that she felt when Gina opened her eyes again. Recovery for Gina was long and agonizing in many ways, but she was alive, and she was grateful for that. She was alive thanks to Darren and Edward, and she was alive thanks to the doctors who refused to let her go, and she was alive thanks to her own perseverance. The man who was credited with keeping Gina alive and helping with the co-pilots as well is Darren Hicks, who was only 20 years old when all of this happened. He was recognized by the USO, where he was honored for, being not only in the same crash, but also doing a phenomenal job in his ability to keep track of everything that was happening and making sure that everyone got the care that they needed and made it out alive. The sources for this episode include USO.gov, GoCoastGuard.com, Olympics.com, TheOlympian.com, PublicSafetyAviation.org, DesertNews.com, SeattleTimes.com, KSL.com, and along with 2 interviews with Gina on They Had to Go Out and Wild Entertainment. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you being here. If you have not already, please go follow Tragedy with a View on Instagram and Facebook. I upload photos to go along with each episode, which will allow for a better understanding of the people, the places, and the events that are discussed in each episode. You can support Tragedy with a View by going to patreon.com/tragedywithaview. For as little as $1.99, you will gain access to regular episodes, early release episodes, and exclusive featured stories of your choosing each month. Currently, there are 26 or more episodes for subscribers only to binge. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. We will chat again next week. Bye.